Listen carefully. Can you hear it? That distant, mournful cry echoing through the twisted spires of the nightmare of Mensis. It's the sound of Mergo, an infant god who exists without form, without substance, yet whose lament pierces through dimensions to haunt every hunter who dares to climb that moonlit tower. This is not merely the cry of one lost child. It is the echo of a cosmic tragedy that repeats itself across every corner of Bloodborne's universe, a pattern so consistent and cruel that it cannot be coincidence. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 lore, where today we unravel one of the most heartbreaking mysteries in all of gaming. Why does every great one lose its child? The answer to this question lies buried in the most precious and horrifying items a hunter can discover. The third umbilical cords, those writhing remnants of divine birth that grant us communion with beings beyond our comprehension. Each one tells the same story, repeating a phrase that becomes more chilling with every discovery. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. Not some great ones. Not most. Every single one. This is not a curse or a punishment. It's presented as an immutable law of their existence, as fundamental to their nature as their ability to transcend dimensions or drive mortals to madness with their mere presence. What makes this tragedy even more profound is what these supreme beings do in response to their loss. They don't simply grieve in their cosmic loneliness. They actively seek replacements among humanity, turning our world into their desperate nursery, transforming women into unwilling vessels for their impossible offspring. The streets of Yharnam run red with blood, not just from the beast plague, but from a divine reproductive crisis playing out on a scale we can barely comprehend. The very foundation of the healing church's blood ministration, the source of Yharnam's rise and fall, stems from this primal need of gods to fill the void left by their lost children. As we descend into this investigation, we'll examine every documented case of divine loss and the horrifying lengths these cosmic beings go to in their attempts to circumvent their biological or perhaps dimensional limitations. From Oedon's formless attempts at fatherhood through corrupted blood, to the Orphan of Kos, whose violent birth created a curse that spans centuries, to Queen Yharnam's eternal vigil over her stolen child, Mergo, will piece together a pattern that reveals something fundamental about the nature of godhood itself. The evidence suggests that ascending to the level of a great one comes with a terrible price: the inability to create and sustain life in the way that lesser beings take for granted. If you're finding value in uncovering these dark truths alongside me, I genuinely appreciate if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this investigation reach fellow hunters lost in the labyrinthine mysteries of Yharnam. Your support through the algorithm helps ensure these deep explorations can continue illuminating the shadows that, From Software has so carefully crafted. The third umbilical cords serve as our primary evidence for this phenomenon, and their very name carries significance that many hunters overlook. In human biology, the umbilical cord is cut into 3 parts after birth: a third for the mother, a third for the father, and a third for the child. But in Bloodborne's twisted nativity, these thirds represent something far more disturbing. They are fragments of failed divine reproduction, each one a testament to an attempt at creating life that ended in tragedy. The game provides us with 4 of these cords, though only 3 are needed for the most profound transformation a hunter can undergo. Each one comes from a different tragic birth, and each one reinforces the same terrible truth. Consider the precise wording that appears across multiple cord descriptions. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The structure of this sentence is crucial to understanding the chronology of divine tragedy. The loss comes first. It's not that seeking surrogates causes the loss, but rather that the loss drives them to seek surrogates. This is confirmed canon, appearing word for word in the game's item descriptions, which From Software has always used as their primary vehicle for conveying absolute truths about their worlds. The use of present tense loses rather than past tense lost suggests this isn't a historical event, but an ongoing reality. Great ones don't simply lose a child once. They exist in a state of perpetual loss, unable to maintain their offspring even when they successfully conceive them. The cord we obtain from Arianna's child provides perhaps the most direct observation of this phenomenon. Here we witness the complete cycle, Oedon, the formless Great One who exists only in blood and voice, successfully impregnates a human woman with special blood. The pregnancy comes to term with shocking speed, accelerated by the blood moon's influence. Yet the moment the infant emerges, it dies, leaving behind only this precious cord. Arianna herself doesn't survive the ordeal, her body unable to withstand the strain of birthing, something that exists partially in dimensions our physics cannot accommodate. The description of this particular cord explicitly states, "To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison." This confirms that the Great Ones use blood itself as a medium for reproduction when they lack physical form. The abandoned old workshop presents us with another cord, this one seemingly left behind by the moon presence itself when it first created the hunter's dream. The workshop exists in our reality, while the dream exists in another plane, and this cord may represent the moon presence's own failed attempt at creating offspring, abandoned in the very place where it would later establish its surrogate relationship with Gurman and subsequent hunters. The fact that this cord is found in the real workshop rather than the dream version suggests it predates the dream's creation, a remnant of divine failure that preceded the moon presence's elaborate scheme to use hunters as tools for preventing other Great Ones from succeeding where it failed. Moving deeper into the pattern, we find the cord from Iosefka's clinic, specifically from the false Iosefka who was impregnated after being transformed into a celestial emissary. This case is particularly fascinating because it demonstrates that even humans who have been elevated closer to the Great One's level through experimentation still serve as potential surrogate mothers. The choir's experiments in creating celestial emissaries were attempts to bridge the gap between human and Great One. Yet even these enhanced beings could only serve as vessels, not as true Great Ones capable of sustaining their own divine offspring. The impostor Iosefka speaks of being chosen and experiencing a blessed state, unaware that she's merely another failed attempt at circumventing cosmic infertility. The final cord comes from Mergo's wet nurse, though technically it originates from Mergo itself. Queen Yharnam's child with Oedon, stolen from her womb by the school of Mensis for their rituals. This cord's description is particularly revealing. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. This cord granted Mensis audience with Mergo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. Here we see multiple layers of tragedy. Mergo was lost to Queen Yharnam, exists in a state between life and death, and when the school of Mensis attempted to commune with this infant god, their minds couldn't withstand the experience, resulting in their collective death while their consciousness persists in the nightmare. If you're finding yourself drawn deeper into these revelations and want to ensure you don't miss future investigations into the cosmic mysteries of gaming's greatest worlds, consider subscribing to join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep archaeological expeditions through gaming's most intricate narratives possible, and I'm grateful for every hunter who chooses to walk these shadowed paths alongside me. Now let's examine Oedon specifically, the formless Great One whose nature makes its attempts at reproduction particularly disturbing. Oedon exists without physical form, manifesting only through blood and voice, specifically through the sound of blood itself. The chapel dweller who serves Oedon unknowingly speaks of being drawn to the chapel by its pleasant sound, never realizing he's describing Oedon's voice calling through spilled blood. This formless existence doesn't stop Oedon from yearning for offspring. If anything, it makes that yearning more desperate and the methods more invasive. Oedon targets women with suitable blood, and the game provides clear evidence of its selection criteria. Arianna, with her Cainhurst lineage and special blood that provides more health than any other blood vial, becomes pregnant if she survives to the blood moon. Queen Yharnam, whose Pthumerian blood was already considered divine by ancient standards, bore Mergo through Aiden's influence. Even the false Iosefka, transformed and elevated through the choir's experiments, becomes a vessel. But notably, not every woman is suitable. The old woman from central Yharnam, should she survive to the chapel, never becomes pregnant despite being in Oedon's presence. This suggests that Oedon requires specific blood qualities that connect to the old blood itself. The mechanics of how a formless being achieves pregnancy reveal themselves through environmental storytelling and item descriptions. Blood ministration, the practice of injecting old blood that the healing church built its entire theology around, is essentially humans consuming diluted essence of great ones. When someone with the right blood composition enters a space where Oedon's presence is strong, like Oedon Chapel, and when cosmic conditions align during the blood moon, conception occurs without any physical contact. The woman's blood itself becomes the medium through which Oedon implants its essence. This is confirmed canon from Arianna's umbilical cord description, which explicitly credits corrupted blood as the mechanism. Queen Yharnam's case provides the most complete picture of this tragic cycle. As the Pthumerian queen, she possessed blood that was already considered divine by her civilization's standards. Her pregnancy with Mergo represents one of the earliest known attempts by a Great One to produce offspring through a human surrogate. The game presents evidence that this pregnancy was not voluntary. Queen Yharnam appears throughout the game as a specter, still wearing her blood-stained dress, weeping and searching for her lost child. Her presence manifests most strongly as we approach Mergo, and after we silence the infant god's cries by defeating its wet nurse, she bows to us in gratitude or perhaps grief, finally able to find some form of closure. The violence of Mergo's birth is evidenced by the Yharnam stone we find after defeating Queen Yharnam in the Pthumerian Ehil Chalice dungeon. This stone is described as a sacred heirloom that was used to contact Mergo, but its appearance, a crystallized, calcified mass, suggests it may be the physical remains of the infant god's original form. The school of Menses tore Mergo from Queen Yharnam's womb in their desperate attempt to commune with a Great One, and in doing so, they separated the consciousness from any physical vessel it might have inhabited. Mergo exists now only as a voice, a cry that echoes through the nightmare, protected by a wet nurse that serves as a surrogate body to give form to the formless. The Orphan of Kos presents a unique variation on this pattern, one born from violence and vengeance rather than the typical reproductive yearning. Kos, a Great One that washed ashore at the fishing hamlet, was already pregnant when discovered. The game never reveals who or what the father might have been, and community theories range from another Great One to some form of parthenogenesis. What we know from confirmed canon is that Bergenworth scholars, led by Master Willem and including German and Maria, desecrated Kos's corpse in their search for eyes on the inside, their quest for knowledge and ascension. But Kos was not simply dead. Evidence suggests she possessed enough lingering consciousness to curse those who defiled her and her unborn child. The orphan was torn from her corpse, denied even the possibility of birth, yet this violation created something even more disturbing. A consciousness that would manifest in the hunter's nightmare as a fully grown, eternally suffering entity. The orphan we fight is not an infant but appears elderly, with long white hair and a hunched form, as if it aged rapidly in its nightmare prison, or represents what it might have become had it been allowed to live. The connection between the orphan and Gammon becomes clear through their shared characteristics. Both cry out for their mothers. The orphan literally screams for Kos, while Gammon calls for Master Willem and Lady Maria in his sleep, seeking parental figures to release him from his nightmare. The crying that links them is the same sound, suggesting that Gehrman's imprisonment in the hunter's dream is directly connected to the curse Kos placed upon those who participated in the hamlet's desecration. When we defeat the orphan and return its spirit to Kos's corpse, we see a shadow that looks remarkably like Gehrman stand up and bow before disappearing, finally freed from the maternal curse. The orphan's weapon, its own placenta transformed into a club, represents one of the most visceral symbols of denied birth in the game. It attacks us with what should have been its source of nourishment, turned instead into an instrument of violence. The placenta still drips with fluid that spreads like lightning when struck against the ground, suggesting the divine power that still courses through what should have been a life-giving organ. This transformation of birth into violence, of creation into destruction, exemplifies the fundamental wrongness of great ones attempting to reproduce in our reality. The wet nurse that protects Mergo deserves special examination as potentially the most successful surrogate arrangement we witness, though successful is relative when discussing divine tragedies. This entity appears as a hooded figure with multiple arms wielding swords, but most tellingly, it has no visible child in its arms despite the crying we hear. The wet nurse serves as both protector and prison for Mergo, giving form to something that exists only as consciousness and sound. When we defeat the wet nurse, we don't actually kill Mergo. We release it, as evidenced by the crying that continues for several seconds after the battle before finally fading to silence. The school of Mensis' ritual that brought them into contact with Mergo resulted in what the game calls the stillbirth of their brains. This phrase is crucial, not death, but stillbirth, as if their attempt to commune with an infant great one transformed their consciousness into something that was never truly alive despite continuing to exist. The corpses we find throughout the lecture building in Yharnam are frozen in positions of supplication, their bodies intact, but their minds transported to the nightmare where they exist in a state between life and death. Much like Mergo itself. The moon presence orchestrates much of the hunter's journey specifically to eliminate these infant great ones or their surrogates. Consider the pattern. We silence Mergo. By defeating its wet nurse, we can kill Arianna's child either directly or by causing Arianna's death. We defeat the Orphan of Kos, and we can prevent Iosefka's child from being born by killing her before the blood moon. The hunter's dream itself is designed as a mechanism for this purpose. Hunters are made immortal through the dream specifically so they can accomplish what normal humans cannot, traverse nightmares and destroy beings that exist partially outside our reality. But why would the moon presence want other infant great ones eliminated? The evidence points to competition for surrogates. If every great one loses its child and yearns for a surrogate, and if suitable surrogates are rare, women with specific blood qualities who can survive the pregnancy, then great ones are essentially competing for a limited resource. The moon presence has already claimed the hunters as its surrogates through the hunter's dream, with Gehrman serving as the first and the player potentially becoming the next. By having hunters eliminate other infant great ones, the moon presence removes competition while maintaining its own claim on humanity's potential as surrogate children. The hunter's relationship with the moon presence reveals itself fully in the childhood's beginning-ending, where consuming 3/3 umbilical cords grants us enough insight to resist the moon presence's embrace. But we don't simply resist, we transform into an infant great one ourselves, with the doll picking us up and cradling us as her own child. This transformation suggests that the cords don't just grant communion with great ones, they contain enough of their essence that consuming multiple cords allows us to transcend our humanity entirely. This brings us to a profound realization about the nature of blood echoes and our progression as hunters. Every enemy we kill releases blood echoes, which the game describes as the lingering will of the blood. But whose will? The evidence suggests these echoes contain traces of Oedon's essence. Remember, Oedon exists only in blood and voice. As we collect thousands upon thousands of blood echoes throughout our hunt, we're essentially gathering Oedon's scattered essence into ourselves. The doll who channels these echoes to strengthen us repeatedly says she can hear them whispering. By the end of the game, we've accumulated so much of this formless great one's essence that we've become, in a very real sense, Oedon's surrogate child. The biological impossibility of great ones reproducing successfully might stem from their fundamental incompatibility with physical reality as we understand it. Developer interviews have confirmed that From Software drew inspiration from the pseudo-scientific notion that highly evolved beings reproduce less successfully, taken to its logical extreme with beings that have evolved beyond physical dimensions. Great ones exist partially in nightmare realms, dream states, and dimensions that operate on different physical laws than our own. When they attempt to create offspring, they're trying to force something that exists across multiple dimensions into a single physical form, a process that inevitably fails. Consider how great ones manifest in our world versus their own realms. Rome appears as a massive spider in Bergenworth's lake, but in the Moonside Lake, a nightmare reflection, she reveals abilities and movements impossible in physical space. The amygdalae cling to buildings throughout Yharnam, mostly invisible, but in the nightmare frontier they move freely and demonstrate their true power. Ibrietus weeps in the Grand Cathedral, seemingly trapped in our reality and unable to return to the cosmos from which she came. These beings are fundamentally incompatible with our dimension's rules, and their offspring inherit this incompatibility. The pregnancy process itself appears to require specific cosmic conditions. The blood moon triggers multiple pregnancies simultaneously. Arianna, Iosefka, and presumably others we don't directly witness. This celestial event doesn't just affect the Great One's ability to reproduce, it represents a thinning of the barriers between dimensions, a moment when the nightmare and the waking world overlap enough for conception to occur. The blood moon turns the sky red and causes the amygdalae to become visible, suggesting that the entire dimensional structure of reality becomes more permeable during this event. Queen Yharnam's eternal mourning throughout the game serves as a reminder that the human cost of divine reproduction extends beyond physical death. She appears to us at key moments in our journey toward Mergo, her spectral form still wearing the blood-stained dress from her violent birth experience. Her presence is strongest in the Nightmare of Mensis, where she stands before Mergo's tower, weeping. After we silence Mergo's cries, she appears one final time to bow to us. Whether in gratitude for ending her child's suffering or in grief at its final silence, we cannot know. Her tragedy is that she survived what Arianna could not, doomed to exist eternally with the memory of her loss. The violation inherent in these divine pregnancies cannot be overlooked. Neither Arianna nor Iosefka consent to their pregnancies. They occur through proximity to Great One's influence rather than any conscious choice. Arianna is particularly tragic. She offers her blood to help us, shows kindness despite the horror surrounding her, yet becomes a victim of Oedon's reproductive yearning simply because her bloodline makes her suitable. Her death after giving birth, looking at the creature she produced with apparent horror, emphasizes that these women are victims of cosmic forces beyond their comprehension or control. Even the false Iosefka, who actively chose to transform herself through the choir's experiments, didn't choose pregnancy. She speaks of feeling chosen, but doesn't understand what she's been chosen for until it's too late. The game presents these pregnancies as a form of cosmic horror that specifically targets women, turning their bodies into battlegrounds for dimensional incompatibilities they never agreed to host. The crying of infant great ones haunts the game's soundscape. Mergo's cry echoes through the Nightmare of Mensis. The orphan screams on the beach of the fishing hamlet, and even in the hunter's dream we can sometimes hear what sounds like distant infant crying when standing near certain graves. This audio design choice emphasizes that the loss of divine children is not a silent tragedy. It reverberates through dimensions, a constant reminder of what has been lost and what continues to be sought. When we examine the endings of Bloodborne through the lens of this reproductive tragedy, new meanings emerge. The Yharnam sunrise ending, where we accept Gehrman's mercy and awaken from the dream, represents a rejection of the entire cycle. We refuse to become either a surrogate child or a parent to divine offspring. The Honoring Wishes ending, where we replace Gehrman as the moon presence's surrogate, traps us in the same cycle he endured, maintaining the status quo of divine yearning. But the childhood's beginning ending offers something different by becoming an infant. Great One ourselves, cradled by the doll, we potentially break the cycle by succeeding where all others failed. Yet this success raises disturbing questions. Did we truly break the pattern, or have we simply become the newest participant in it? As an infant Great One, will we too eventually lose our ability to remain in physical form? Will the doll serve as our wet nurse, maintaining our existence through her care, but unable to prevent our eventual loss? The game doesn't answer these questions, leaving us to contemplate whether ascension to godhood is a triumph or simply the beginning of a new cycle of loss. The themes explored through this divine reproductive crisis connect to fundamental human fears about legacy, mortality, and the price of power. The Great Ones have achieved what humans throughout history have sought: transcendence, immortality, power over reality itself. Yet they cannot perform the most basic biological function that ensures continuity of existence. They are gods who cannot create lasting life, supreme beings whose supremacy comes at the cost of the most fundamental form of creation. This connects to broader Lovecraftian themes about the price of knowledge and ascension. The scholars of Bergenworth sought eyes on the inside, sought to elevate their thoughts, to evolve beyond humanity. Master Willem's famous adage, "We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood," takes on new meaning when we understand that the blood they transcended through was itself the medium of failed divine reproduction. Every injection of old blood, every communion with the cosmos brought humanity closer to the same evolutionary dead end that the Great Ones represent. The fishing hamlet's curse. "Mother is dead, her baby taken," spreads beyond those who participated in Kos's desecration to affect all hunters who partake in blood ministration. This curse ensures that hunters will forever participate in the cycle of killing infant gods and their surrogates, perpetuating the very tragedy that created their power. We become agents of divine infanticide, our strength growing from preventing the very thing that drives our prey: the successful birth and survival of Great One offspring. The transformation system in Bloodborne, where consuming 3 umbilical cords allows us to resist the moon presence and transform into an infant. Great One suggests that these cords contain more than just connection to the divine. They contain the essence of lost divinity itself. Each cord represents a failed attempt at creating divine life, and by consuming them, we gather that dispersed potential into ourselves. We literally build our godhood from the remains of dead god children, a cannibalistic ascension that embodies the horror at the game's heart. The Pthumerians, the ancient civilization that first communed with Great Ones, seem to have understood this cycle better than Yharnam scholars. Their chalice dungeons are filled with the remains of failed attempts to bridge the gap between human and divine. The Pthumerian descendant, the watchdog of the old lords, the bloodletting beast. Each represents a different approach to achieving what the Great Ones cannot: sustainable divine procreation. Yet all failed, leaving only guardians of empty tombs and the echoing cries of Queen Yharnam searching for her lost child. The bloodletting beast in particular offers a disturbing glimpse of these experiments. When its head is severed, parasites emerge from its neck. Parasites that some in the community theorize might be attempts at creating artificial Great One offspring. The Pthumerians may have tried to use parasitism as a workaround for divine reproduction, creating organisms that could gestate within hosts rather than requiring traditional birth. Yet even these experiments failed, producing only monsters that guard the deepest chalice dungeons. Looking at the Healing Church's various branches, we see different responses to the knowledge of divine reproductive failure. The choir attempted to create celestial emissaries, elevating humans toward Great One status in hopes of bridging the reproductive gap. The School of Mensis tried to commune directly with an infant Great One, thinking perhaps they could learn from Mergo how to sustain divine offspring. The hunters simply killed, whether knowingly or not, participating in the Moon Presence's scheme to eliminate competition for surrogates. The research hall patients, with their enlarged heads and desperate pleas for eyes, represent perhaps the most tragic human response to this knowledge. They sought to transform themselves into beings capable of serving as better vessels for Great One offspring, inflating their heads to accommodate more eyes, more insight, more compatibility with cosmic reproduction. Yet they only managed to create the living failures. Beings caught between human and divine, capable of neither human reproduction nor serving as successful surrogates for Great Ones. The role of blood ministration in Yharnam's rise and fall becomes even more tragic when viewed through this reproductive lens. The citizens of Yharnam injected themselves with old blood seeking healing and transcendence, unknowingly consuming the essence of beings desperate to reproduce. The beast plague that resulted might be seen as a rejection of this divine essence, the human body revolting against being transformed into a potential vessel for impossible offspring. The beasts that roam Yharnam's streets are perhaps the lucky ones. Having transformed rather than becoming pregnant with divine parasites, they cannot birth successfully. As we reach the culmination of this investigation into the reproductive tragedy of the Great Ones, we must confront what it means for humanity in Bloodborne's universe. Humans exist in a cosmic economy where their primary value to higher beings is as surrogate parents for offspring that cannot survive. The blood that heals also enslaves, creating a connection between human and divine that reduces humans to unwilling participants in a reproductive cycle they cannot understand or escape. The doll's role in this cycle deserves final consideration. Created by the moon, presence to channel, blood echoes to strengthen hunters, she becomes, in the true ending, the only successful mother to a Great One infant, ourselves. She picks up our transformed body with genuine care, promising to look after us always. Perhaps this is the only way the cycle can be broken, not through biological reproduction, but through artificial creation, a constructed being serving as parent to an ascended human who has become divine through consuming the essence of failed divine births. Yet even this apparent success carries dark implications. The doll exists because Gurman, trapped in his grief over Maria, created her as a replacement for his lost companion. She is herself a surrogate for human connection, animated by the moon presence to serve its needs. Now she becomes mother to an infant god who was once human, who achieved divinity through violence and consumption of divine remains. The cycle doesn't break, it simply takes a new, even more artificial form. The scholarship of Bloodborne's world, from Byrgenwerth to the Healing Church to the various scholars we encounter, all stems from trying to understand and overcome this fundamental limitation of divinity. The notes we find scattered throughout the game. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. The sky and the cosmos are one, represent attempts to comprehend why beings of such power cannot perform the most basic biological function. The irony is that in seeking to transcend humanity, these scholars pursued a state of being that is fundamentally barren. This brings us back to that crying we heard at the beginning, Mergo's lament, echoing through the nightmare. It's not just the cry of one lost infant, but a sound that represents the fundamental tragedy of Bloodborne's universe. Gods that cannot create lasting life, humans transformed into unwilling vessels, and children that exist in states between life and death, between dimensions, between possibility and impossibility. The hunter's journey through Yharnam is not just a night of hunting beasts, but a participation in a cosmic reproductive crisis that has shaped the very nature of reality in this world. Every Great One loses its child, not as punishment, not as curse, but as the inevitable result of existing beyond the dimensions where life as we understand it can thrive. Their yearning for surrogates represents not evil, but a desperate attempt to experience what every beast, every human, every simple creature takes for granted. The ability to create something that will outlive them, to pass on their essence to a new generation. In their transcendence, they have lost the most fundamental aspect of existence, and their attempts to reclaim it have transformed human civilization into a nightmare of blood, pregnancy, and loss. As we conclude this deep exploration into one of gaming's most profound tragedies, I want to thank you for joining me in unraveling these dark threads. The question of why every Great One loses its child reveals itself not as a mystery to be solved, but as a fundamental aspect of Bloodborne's cosmic horror. The price of godhood is the inability to create gods. If this investigation has given you new perspective on the hunt, new understanding of the cosmic forces at play in Yharnam streets, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Keen 7 lore. Your support makes possible these extensive expeditions into gaming's deepest lore, and I'm genuinely grateful for every fellow seeker of forbidden knowledge who chooses to join our growing community. Together, we'll continue to explore the shadows other hunters fear to tread, always remembering that some insights cannot be unlearned, some truths cannot be forgotten, and some cycles, no matter how tragic, cannot be broken. Until next time, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may your hunt be free from the crying of lost children, both human and divine.